move to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? Give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Was the minister informed by the Prime Minister before the Prime Minister advised the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, that he would weaken our immigration laws to allow criminals to stay in Australia?
It's a question that no one can accept the premise of. I don't quite know what the Shadow Minister is wanting me to answer. What I can say is this. In putting in place ministerial direction, I had regard to our national interests and common sense, including the protection of the Australian community. And that was the advice that I was given.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why is trade important to economic growth? What impact has the Albanese government's engagement on trade had on Australian export industries, and what opportunities are there in the future?
Order. Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Parramatta for his question and for welcoming me to his electorate just a week ago, looking at affordable housing there around the Westmead precinct. Now, we are the 13th largest economy in the world, but to keep growing we need to focus on a future made in Australia, pursuing greater diversity in what we make and what we send to the world, making more things here and getting economic growth as a result. Now, tomorrow marks 1 year since the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement ended into force. In the first 10 months since the deal was implemented, Australian exports to the UK have reached $5 billion, a 100% increase, including in things like sheep meat, indeed, has expanded substantially, as well as wine and other produce as well. Now, this government has also worked hard to stabilise our relationship with China. Our approach has been patient, calibrated and deliberate, without compromising any of our national interests, and it has paid dividends. And today I welcome the announcement that 5 of Australia's leading beef producers can resume their exports to China. This means jobs. This means economic growth. This means significant benefit for farmers, particularly in Queensland and in New South Wales. JBS Beef City in Parrawanda in Queensland, JBS Dinmore in Riverview, Kilcoy Pastoral Company in Kilcoy, Merrimist in Caboolture, and the Northern Cooperative Meat in Casino on the north coast of New South Wales. Now, this follows the opening up of our exports of coal, cotton, copper ores, timber, barley and, of course, more recently, wine. Of the $20 billion of trade impediments that were there with China, almost all of them now have been lifted. But we can do more across the board as well, including the deal that we've done, the largest ever defence export deal of $1 billion for 100 boxes that are made in Redbank in Queensland to be exported to Germany. Growing our economy, creating secure jobs and boosting our industries. Now, a future made in Australia presents enormous opportunities for further growth in our exports, in our critical minerals, in our value-adding, in our advanced manufacturing, including in areas like green aluminium and green steel. If we get this right, we can secure a very prosperous future for Australia. Trade is an important part of it, and we'll continue to defend the national interest by advancing a future made here in Australia.
Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Direction 99 was created as a result of the Prime Minister's meeting with former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in July of 2022. Why did this weak and incompetent Prime Minister put his close and sycophantic relationship with Jacinda Ardern ahead of the safety of Australians?
Order. Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security members on my right will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition was heard in silence. It's highly disorderly to be interjecting before the Prime Minister speaks. Anyone on my right interjects, they'll leave the chamber. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. All the anger's there in just one question. The anger, the abuse, it's all there, Mr Speaker.
David Crow's on here.
All the characters. He's moved on from abusing journalists, Mr Speaker. Now,
the Leader of the Nationals.
The Leader of the Opposition did a tweet yesterday. Oh.
Yep. Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance. The Prime Minister was asked a question on a serious matter where literally dozens of Australians have fallen victim to criminals.
Resume your seat. Yeah. Order. We are 28 seconds in. I'm going to hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. When there is a question that is so full of abuses against Standing Order 90 and reflection on members, it is completely unreasonable for the Leader of the Opposition to be so precious that he can't take any criticism in return.
The Prime Minister has been asked a question. The Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise a point of order. Just to remind all members— all right, well, I was going to deal with the point of order, but the Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. In that tweet, the Leader of the Opposition said that he cancelled visas. The cancellation power was exercised within the limits of the Constitution. He said the quiet bit out loud, Mr Speaker, the quiet bit out loud, because the reality is that on this bloke's watch, 1,300 hardcore criminals were released from immigration detention centres. 1,300. Not because of a decision of the High Court, not because of a decision of the High Court, but on his watch. They were released. No curfews, no ankle bracelets, no monitoring, no regard for community safety. It included 102 sex offenders, 64 of whom are child sex offenders, 40 domestic violence offenders, 4 murders, alleged murders or individuals convicted of accessory to murder, including a British man who was convicted in 2016 of being an accessory to the stabbing of an associate in a drug operation, helped another man carry the victim's body to the boot of a car and dump it in a makeshift grave. Another British man convicted of being an accessory to murder when a drug associate shot another man in what was described as a gangland execution. Section 501 has not changed. What we did change was the capacity of Kiwis to become Australian citizens, and I'm pleased that 20,000 of them have taken it up. 20,000 of them have taken it up, and that is the difference that it's made. But on this bloke's watch, the AAT decided a 45-year-old New Zealand man convicted of 3 charges of an indecent act with a child under 16 should be allowed to stay. On this bloke's watch.
Order. The Prime Minister, we've already had a point of order on relevance. I don't want the Deputy of the Opposition to take a point of order on relevance. She has the call.
I think a ruling, Mr Speaker. Is it in order for the Prime Minister to talk about the opposition in his answer?
Well, order. Well, the time to do that would have been when the point of order was taken on relevance. As I explained to the House, 28 seconds in is not, in my judgment, the best time to take a pointer on relevance. Under the standing orders, one is allowed to be taken. So just a reminder to all members, if you want to take a point of order of relevance, careful when you pull that trigger. Just going to remind the Prime Minister to be relevant, directly relevant to the question.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. That, of course, was made in accordance with Ministerial Direction 79, which was issued when this guy was the senior minister and the member for Banks was the junior minister. But there's many more, Mr. Speaker, so if we want to go through, we'll go through the whole lot,
Order.
one by one.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. Before I call the member for Adelaide, I would like to do some acknowledgements to guests in the House today. I'm very pleased to inform the House that present in the Speaker's Visitors Gallery today is a delegation of 16 members from the United States Congress participating in the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. I'm also pleased to advise the House that Ms Sim Ann, a Senior Minister of State, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of National Development in the Singaporean Government, is joining us. And also I'd like to acknowledge students and teachers from Catholic College in Wodonga and the member for Indi's electorate. On behalf of the House, welcome to you all. I give a call to the member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Social Security Services. How is the Albanese Labor government providing more support in the safety net for pensioners, and are there any threats to this support being provided?
Give a call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Adelaide for his question and for his advocacy for seniors in his electorate. The Albanese government is proud to continue the strong Labor tradition of supporting older Australians. Now, we know Australians, including our seniors, are under pressure, and we are providing more cost of living relief. We are strengthening the safety net for pensioners by continuing the freeze on deeming rates for a further 12 months. This means part pensioners may earn more on their investments without it affecting their payments, benefiting around 450,000 aged pensioners. Now, our government is also increasing the maximum rates of rent assistance by a further 10%. This is our second consecutive increase and means that on the September 20, the maximum rates of rent assistance will have increased by more than 40% since our government was elected. Now, this will assist 200,000 aged pension households. And of course, our freeze on co-payments for PBS medications means that 6 million pensioners and other concession card holders will pay a maximum of $7.70 per script for the next 5 years. And our energy bill relief will provide every Australian household with $300 rebate for their power bills. Now, these measures are providing significant additional assistance to pensioners and are in addition, of course, to the indexation of the pension, which ensures pensions keep up with the cost of living. Now, it was Labor, when last in government, who increased pensions and introduced the more generous indexation arrangements. Now, of course, I'm asked if there's any threats to pensioners and for more support for pensioners, and unfortunately it is. It is those opposite. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite have a record when it comes to cutting support for pensioners. Now, despite promising no cuts to the pension, the former coalition government did exactly the opposite. The former coalition government, in which the Leader of the Opposition was a Cabinet Minister, tightened the pension asset test, kicking thousands of older Australians off the pension and reducing pensions for many others.
Order.
For older Australians, they axed the senior supplement. And let's not forget those opposite had a plan to lift the pension qualifying age to 70 and remove the better off indexation that we put in place. And now the member for Hume is leading the charge again to attack the pension. It's time for the member for Hume, and indeed all of those opposite, to come clean for their plans for the pension. We know the member for Hume has labelled indexation on the pension as unrestrained spending, which he will claw back. Labor will stand up for pensioners, unlike those opposite.
Give the call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today's media are reporting that you gave big corporations an ironclad guarantee that new environment laws would not include a climate trigger to stop more coal and gas mines. Prime Minister, did you give such a guarantee? When did you give it, and why was it kept a secret from the Australian people?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
No.
Give the call to the Honourable Order. Give the call to the Honourable Member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government working to support our pensioners and low and middle income earners to ease cost of living pressures? What does it mean for the budget and what has been the response?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the wonderful member for Robertson for the way that he represents his community in this place. Cost of living relief in the budget is for everyone, Mr Speaker, in the form of tax cuts for taxpayers, energy bill relief for households and getting wages moving again for all Australian workers. But as a Labor government, there's also a particular emphasis on the low-paid and people on pensions and payments. 2.9 million Australians earning less than $45,000 will get the tax cut they need and deserve, but would have been denied by those opposite. There's cheaper medicines by freezing the maximum cost of PBS medicines for 5 years for people with a concession card. We've frozen deeming rates for 876,000 people, including 450,000 aged pensioners. And about 200,000 of the million people who will benefit from our increase to Commonwealth rent assistance are on the aged pension as well. So, Mr Speaker, all of that means that the pension is up about $120 a fortnight since we came to office. JobSeeker up about the same. Rent assistance up about $81 a fortnight more. Youth allowance between $81 and $108 more a fortnight. Now, Mr Speaker, this is a combination of decisions that we've taken and funded in the budget combined with the indexation of payments. And until the member for Hume became the Shadow Treasurer, that indexation of payments was more or less a bipartisan thing, Mr Speaker. Then he started talking about $315 billion of overspending in the budget, which includes the indexation of pensions and payments, Mr Speaker. He calls that overspending. This should send a shiver up the spine of every aged pensioner in this country that he thinks indexing their pensions is overspending, Mr Speaker. And if he thinks there's $315 billion too much spending in the budget, why won't he come clean on his $315 billion of cuts, Mr Speaker? Could it be because the last time they came into office they smashed Medicare and they came after people on pensions and payments and they brought in robo-debt? Mr Speaker, now it is easy to dismiss this Shadow Treasurer because of his bumbling incompetence and his incoherence and his failure to even explain the most basic details in the opposition leader's budget reply, Mr Speaker.
Order. The Treasurer will pause. There is far, far too much noise on both my left and the member for Hume, while I'm trying to deal with a point of order, is definitely not the time to interject. He knows that. The manager of opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Standing Order 90, reflections on members. You commendably have been working.
Members on my right, I want to hear this point of order.
You commendably have been working to increase standards in this House. The standing orders say that personal reflections on other members shall be considered highly disorderly. In fact, the Leader of the House raised the very same standing order just a few moments ago. I ask that you direct the Treasurer to cease his repeated practice of undignified personal attacks.
Order. This is a serious issue, and order, members on my right. This is a serious issue. The Minister for the Environment and Water is now warned. If she interjects again, she'll be removed from the chamber. The Leader of the House, on this serious issue.
Serious issue, Mr Speaker. And if the Manager of Opposition Business is seriously proposing that we want to set a standard where most of their questions are out of order, then we can go there. But to be asking the questions that they've been asking today and then suddenly get precious with the glass jaw when anything comes back is absurd.
Order. Before the Treasurer resumes, I just want to remind the House that it is highly disorderly to reflect on members. So the Manager of the Opposition makes a very good point. So if moving forward everyone can agree that in the questions we won't reflect on members and in the answers we won't reflect on members, we won't have this problem. So the Treasurer can cease his critique and return to the question to make sure that we are getting an answer to the question that he was asked. And he has the call.
Mr Speaker, this side of the House, we are supporting people on low and fixed incomes. We are providing cost of living relief to everyone at the same time as we clean up the mess that they left in the budget. We've been turning Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses, and we've been paying down Liberal debt, Mr Speaker. And if they get their hands on the budget, there will be more Liberal debt, there will be more waste, there will be more rorts, and there will be more attacks on Medicare and on pensioners and the lowest paid Australians.
Order. Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Did the Prime Minister implement Direction 99 at the request of New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader for his question. What we do, her question, what we do is we determine our own policy according with our own interests. And that is what we have done. And indeed the request publicly from New Zealand was to remove Section 501. We did not do that. We've created a pathway for better citizenship for New Zealand people who've been here to have that pathway to citizenship. And I'm pleased that indeed 20,000 plus Kiwis now call themselves Australian citizens as well. That's a good thing. So they can fully participate in society. But we're also making sure that we get these things right by abolishing the AAT, something that this week they voted to defend. They voted to defend this system.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause and the Leader of the Opposition will be allowed to make his point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, we took your advice on board. The question was very tight indeed, and I seek your direction as to whether the Prime Minister is relevant to the question that was asked of him.
Well, he did explain in what I heard a very clear answer to the question. It wasn't about that decision. It was another decision that was requested and that the government didn't do. So he is being directly relevant and answering the question. Well, I can't control what the answer is going to be. I can only make sure the Prime Minister is being directly relevant to the question. As long as he's remaining on topic and being directly relevant around the process that he was asked about, around the policy topic that he was asked about. If he strays into other policy topics or other government policy, he'll be called back into line. But I'll listen carefully to make sure he is being directly relevant. But he has addressed the core principle of the question. On the point of order, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Just to clarify, your ruling is that the Prime Minister is in order? Is that your...
Well, my ruling is that he's answered the question and now he...
My question to you was, is it your ruling that the Prime Minister is relevant and within the standing orders?
Well, he is within the standing orders because he's answered the question and he's providing additional information to the topic of the question, and the standing order is specific around being directly relevant. Now, I don't know what he's going to say next, but I'll listen extremely carefully to make sure he's being directly relevant. If he starts talking about another topic, he won't be allowed to do that. So he has the call, and I'll make sure he's relevant.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I directly answered the question, and I directly.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
And I'm directly talking about the issue which the question went to, which goes to people who've been released, including 1,300 on this former Minister's watch, the Leader of the Opposition, as a result of the AAT, including 102 sex offenders and 64 child sex offenders.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How does the Albanese Labor government's recent budget provide cost of living relief to older Australians, including pensioners, and has there been any opposition to providing this relief?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. Of course, cost of living relief has been the #1 priority of this government. We recognise the pressures that are being felt by older Australians, particularly those on the age pension, and of course, inflation that we inherited was double what it is now. Double what it is now. But the pension, of course, is part of our social contract. The promise that we make to people who have built this country, to look after them in their retirement. And that's why in the recent budget we guaranteed age pension indexation and strengthened assistance to pensioners. We maintained the freeze on deeming rates till the 30th of June 2025, helping some 450,000 age pensioners. We've frozen PBS medicine co-payments for pensioners, so the most they will pay is $7.70 per script. We've increased the Medicare levy threshold, so low-income seniors will continue to be exempt from the Medicare levy. We've given every Australian household, including pensioners, $300 in power bill relief. And around 200,000 pensioners will receive an increase in their rent assistance, following on from last year's increase in rent assistance. And we're providing $2.2 billion to strengthen aged care services. Now, I'm asked, is there any opposition to this? What are the barriers? Well, the Leader of the Opposition has called this spending reckless and useless. The Shadow Treasurer says that it's wasteful. They're promising tax breaks for people with hundreds of millions of dollars in super, but they think helping pensioners is a waste of money. A waste of money. Never forget, of course, what they did the last time that they came into office. The 2014 budget tried to increase the pension age to 70 and tried to cut the pension indexation rate. Along with their energy supplement cut, that meant that each pensioner would have lost $724. Now, those opposite like talking tough, but in the end, they always pick on people who aren't doing it tough. Those opposite want young Australians to raid their superannuation and make them more reliant on pension in their old age, and then they want to raid the pension and make it harder for them to rely on it. That's their idea of balance, a trapdoor at both ends.
Member for Hume and the member for Deakin will cease interjecting or be warned. The call goes to the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, did you receive any advice that your Direction 99 would result in more criminals having to stay in Australia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, that is a question appropriately given to the Minister because it's not my direction.
Order. Members on my left. Members on my left will cease interjecting.
What we know in addition is that yesterday they ran out of puff. They ran out of puff. So today they're into conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
Yeah, the Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition will be heard in silence on his point of order.
Mr. Speaker, it is an obvious point of order, and that is relevance. Is it your ruling that the Prime Minister is relevant to the question, the very tight question that was asked of him?
The Leader of the House on the point of order.
To the point of order, Mr. Speaker. The challenge is always there when a question is directed to the wrong minister that refers to a specific direction that has been signed off by a different minister. When someone chooses to answer something that has been directed to the wrong minister, it has always been the case that there is a broader view on relevance. Always.
Yeah. If the Prime Minister is redirecting, oh, hang on. Yep.
On the point of order, the reason that the Leader of the House is speaking in error, I'm sure innocently, but nonetheless leading to the same outcome, is that the Prime Minister was the architect of Direction 99. He did it as a commitment to Jacinda Ardern. He's put our country at risk. And Mr.
Well, my ruling is within 20 seconds of answering the question. I haven't heard really much what the Prime Minister has said, but I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister to make his remarks directly relevant. It was a tight question. Just remind the Leader of the Opposition, relevance is the point to make. It is not about making additional statements. So if the Prime Minister wants to redirect the question, he's entitled to do that under the practice and standing orders as well, but he simply can't go off into other topics, and I'll make sure he's being relevant. And so far, within 20 seconds, I want to make sure what he says further is going to be directly relevant, but so far he hasn't addressed the core part of the question.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The premise of the question is wrong. As the former minister knows, because he issued these directions himself, directions that resulted in almost 1,300 hardcore criminals being released from immigration detention centres. As he knows, these are extensive documents that come from ministers.
Order. The member for Fairfax. Give a call to the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government helping older Australians with housing, including through the $32 billion Homes for Australia plan? What could jeopardise future support?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Fraser for that question. The member for Fraser has been a terrific supporter of our Homes for Australia plan because he understands that too many Australians don't have a safe place to stay, including many older Australians who are doing it tough. Of course, we heard, Mr Speaker, about Homes for Australia plan and the $6 billion in new initiatives, housing initiatives that were in the last budget, and these will directly help many Australians, including older Australians who are currently waiting on our social housing waiting list, Mr Speaker. Our Homes for Australia plan, of course, is now $32 billion in new housing initiatives since we came to office. It includes in the Homes for Australia plan $1.9 billion to boost Commonwealth rent assistance. As we heard from the Minister for Social Services, this is the first back-to-back increase in the Commonwealth rent assistance in more than 30 years, Mr Speaker. Maximum rates of Commonwealth rent assistance will now be 40% higher than when we came to office in May 2022. 40% higher. Direct assistance helping Australians that need it most. This back-to-back boost will help around 1 million Australians, and as we've heard, around 200,000 of them are older Australians who are doing it tough, Mr Speaker. Our Homes for Australia plan also includes our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. And we know, of course, what a difference this fund will make, because we already know that people in the social homes that we have already built are making a real difference. It will impact older Australians, particularly, Mr Speaker, women like MR, whom I met in Melbourne recently. MR told me that after living in so many different places, she's now happy in her new social housing. She said, and I quote, "All I can do is say to everybody, anyone who sees any of this, is thank you." It's people like Tanya, Mr Speaker, who I met in Sydney. Tanya told me to be somewhere safe and beautiful brought her so much joy after years of insecure housing, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, this is in jeopardy.
Order.
I am concerned. I'm concerned for people like Emma and Tanya and Glenda and Nana Pam that I talked about yesterday. And I'm concerned because we've got the member for Hume, the Shadow Treasurer, out there saying, and I quote, "Billions of unnecessary spending will be cut." Unnecessary spending. That includes things like the indexation to pensions and, of course, other payments, Mr Speaker. But what I'm concerned about is, does it mean the Housing Australia Future Fund? The fund that you voted against, does it include the Housing Australia Future Fund? Because, of course, the response to this fund has been huge, and we will be making announcements and we'll be getting houses underway later this year, and it'll be on them. Full of negativity, we're going to get on and build the homes that Australia needs.
Give the call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Immigration Minister. Was Direction 99 an initiative of the Minister?
The call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks, Speaker. Yes.
Order. Order. Members on my left. Order. Order. When the House comes to order. Order. The Leader of the House. Order. When members on my right come to order, we'll hear from the member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to hold social media platforms to account and shine a light on how they impact Australian society?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Australians are rightly concerned about the harmful impacts of social media, particularly in relation to children, and it's a topic of live conversation around the country. Our top priority is keeping Australians safe, particularly vulnerable Australians and children. The Albanese government is determined to use all levers to address new and emerging online safety issues and to make digital platforms more transparent and accountable. One of these mechanisms is the Basic Online Safety Expectations, or the BOSE determination, which is a key element of the Online Safety Act. The BOSE sets out the government's expectations for online services to keep Australians safe, and it covers social media, messaging, gaming services and other apps and websites. In November last year, I announced the Albanese government would remake the BOSE determination in order to provide e-safety with a clear and up-to-date remit in exercising its transparency powers in relation to online services. Mr Speaker, today I'm pleased to inform the House that following consultation, the Basic Online Safety Expectations have been amended to help achieve just that. The updated expectations now include a requirement that the best interest of the child is a primary consideration in any services likely to be accessed by children. It also includes an expectation that user safety be incorporated in the design and operation of generative AI, and that services proactively minimise its use to create harmful content. This complements the work being undertaken by the Attorney-General to ban the creation and non-consensual distribution of deepfake pornography. While governments and regulators around the world are grappling with addressing the many harmful impacts of social media, one thing is clear. It is imperative that industry be more transparent and accountable. And that's why the BOSE is so important. It enables the e-Safety Commissioner and Australians to understand what these companies are doing and, importantly, not doing when it comes to helping stop harms. The e-Safety Commissioner has already issued 4 non-periodic notices to more than 10 companies under the BOSE. Mr Speaker, online safety is a collective responsibility between industry, regulators, government and civil society. It is clear that the platforms need to do more to help keep Australians safe, and the updated BOSE is a key element in holding them to account. Finally, Mr Speakers, I understand that many parents will feel overwhelmed when it comes to keeping their children safe online.
Member for Fisher,
there is a wealth of resources freely available at esafety.gov.au, and I encourage all members to share these with their communities.
Before I call the honourable member, I'll just acknowledge in the gallery today is former Olympic gold medalist and former Senator from the Northern Territory, Nova Peris OAM. Welcome to Parliament. Give the call to the member for Fowler.
My question is to the Education Minister. We have over 38,000 students in Fowler. Over 15% attend universities and almost 22% in high school, hoping that they are heading the right direction. While changes to HECS indexation is welcome, what will the government do to stop the doubling of upfront costs for arts students, studying subjects like history, English, politics and health science, many of whom come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Why are arts students treated differently?
The call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Fowler for her question. The changes that we're making to HECS are big and important for students and graduates across the nation, including 22,000 people in the electorate of Fowler who will benefit from the cuts to HECS indexation. All across the country, we're going to wipe more than $3 billion of HECS debt for more than 3 million Australians. Now, if you're somebody with a HECS debt of, say, 26 grand, which is the average across the nation, that means that once we pass legislation through this parliament, and I hope that it will get the support of all members of the House, that will cut their HECS debt by $1,200. If you've got a HECS debt of, say, $45,000, that will cut your HECS debt by about $2,000. So that's important. The paid prac that we're introducing through the Accord is important too. If you're a teaching student or a nursing student or a social work student, financial support to help with the cost of living while you're studying, doing paid prac is an important thing that has never happened before in this country, never happened with the support of the Commonwealth Government before. You ask about arts degrees. There's recommendations in the Accord that talk about changes there. In the Accord response in the budget, we've agreed to implement 29 of the 47 recommendations in full or in part. Now, the Accord itself is bigger than one budget. The reforms that we need to implement will need to be implemented over the next few decades. But as I said in the budget, we've bitten off a big chunk of it, 29 of the 47 recommendations. In relation to the recommendations around job-ready graduates, we announced in the budget that we would establish an Australian Tertiary Education Commission to steer reform here, and that will include the setting of course fees.
Give a call to the honourable member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to protect Australians from online harms?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Chisholm for her question, and I'm sure she, like me, has the experience of talking to parents, whether they be in our neighbourhood, outside schools, on the sporting fields on the side, when parents are discussing what issues they're really concerned about with their young ones growing up. And every parent, I think, in this country has been concerned about the impact of social media and about what their son or daughter might be being exposed to online. That's why we need to work, not just as governments, but as a whole of society, to address this challenge to our way of life and to the impact that it has particularly on developing minds. The government...
The member for Fisher has been exercised right throughout question time, and he'll now leave the chamber under 94A. Order. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm surprised that this is controversial in this parliament. I would have thought we all have an interest in working on this. That's why we quadrupled funding for the eSafety Commission in last year's budget. We're reviewing the Online Safety Act to ensure that they have the power needed to keep Australians safe, and that includes classification reform to address the availability of very violent pornography. In addition to that, the government's established a Joint Selection Committee on Social Media in Australian Society, chaired by the member for Jagga Jagga, with its interim report due in August. We support minimum age limits on social media for account creation, and our budget has funded an age assurance trial. We need to ensure and explore which technologies are most effective in limiting kids' exposure to inappropriate material, including pornography, but also to social media. This is a challenge. It's not simple, because you can't just close one door online if another one can be opened up somewhere else, including through international registrations. So it is something we do need to get right, which is why we allocated $6.5 million in the budget. We know that existing age limits have not been adequately enforced or are too easy to get around. We are running counter-influence campaigns online as well, so we can directly challenge misogynist and harmful views in the places where this content gets viewed. On the issue of domestic violence and safety for women and children, this is a major topic that will be considered again by National Cabinet when we meet in the third quarter. The government is committed to addressing online harms, whether they occur on social media platforms or anywhere else on the internet.
Call the member for Wannon.
My question is to the Prime Minister. At the Australia-New Zealand Leaders meeting on 8 July 2022, did the Prime Minister commit to change the ministerial direction regarding the removal of New Zealand citizens?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. The Shadow Minister, who I think held this portfolio at one stage, talks as if Direction 99, the premise of this is that it set an entirely new standard, when he knows that it did not.
Order.
Direction 90 talked of a higher level of tolerance for criminals who've lived in the Australian community for most of their lives. Direction 79, signed by Minister Coleman in 2018.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Wannon, a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker. It was a very direct question. It asked whether the Prime Minister gave a commitment at that leaders' meeting to change the ministerial direction regarding the removal of New Zealanders. That is a very, very direct question.
The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Speaker, and to what was just raised, it's therefore clearly directly relevant to that to look at the extent to which it was a change, given that previous directions that had been put in place.
The Prime Minister is able to talk about the lead-up to that decision and arrangements, but he's going to have to be specific regarding the meeting and the decision itself. So I'll just listen carefully to make sure he is being relevant, directly relevant to the member for Wannon.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. If the minister or the former minister or anyone who had been involved in any process at international levels thinks that you sit down and you go through directions in ministerial guidelines, you are just wrong. You are just completely wrong. That is absurd. And that is why the premise of this question is wrong. Directions 90, 79 and 65 all said that Australia may afford a higher level of tolerance for people based upon how long they had been in Australia. The premise of this dry gully that the opposition is going down is completely wrong, as evidenced by the number of people who were released into the community on this minister's watch, who is now the Leader of the Opposition, when he was the minister, because of decisions that were overturned by the AAT, full of their appointments that were made.
The call to the order. Give the call to the honourable member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government helping families and businesses with the cost of energy bills, and what policies have the government rejected and why?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. I thank him for his passion when it comes to action on climate change. And the honourable member asked me about energy bill relief, and of course, last year we implemented the coal and gas caps as well as the rebates, and we saw in the latest inflation figures what the ABS said about the impact of that government decision. They said, excluding the rebates, electricity prices would have risen 13.9% in the 12 months to April 2024, Mr. Speaker. So they are, of course, policies the opposition voted against. and we would have seen increases of up to $992 greater that every Australian, including pensioners, would have had to pay. And of course, this year we have the $300 rebates. Mr. Speaker, no one has to apply, no paperwork to fill out, applied automatically. But of course, the biggest impact on energy prices is what determines the cost of generation and the capital cost of generating electricity. And of course, what's also important is that these new forms of electricity can be deployed quickly. And the honourable member asked me what policies we've rejected, and last week we saw a report which underlines why we have rejected nuclear power for Australia, because it's very expensive and it takes a long time to deploy. And as it happens, that report was delivered on the same day the Shadow Treasurer was at the press club. We wouldn't call it a triumph of an appearance, but nevertheless he was there. And he was asked about the Shadow Treasurer. We're talking about billions of dollars of expenditure. He was asked for a response to GenCost, and he said, the Shadow Treasurer said, lots of people bandy numbers around nuclear and other energy sources. That was it. The Shadow Treasurer asked in response to the nation's premier scientific organisation, and all it could say was lots of people bandy numbers around. But to be fair to the member for Hume, he has previously expressed views more eloquently about nuclear power when he was the Energy Minister, indeed, Mr. Speaker. He was asked at one point why the government he was a member of didn't deploy nuclear power, and he said the economics of traditional nuclear power stations has not typically worked in recent years, Mr. Speaker. Not typically worked. And he's also said, well, the key is to get prices down. Nuclear is not going to help me in that process. As you know, it's a long way off. I know that sector pretty well. He said on another occasion, well, it's just the long time frames. I know the industry pretty well, and it'll be a long time before we'll be realistically able to have nuclear on the ground as a solution for this problem. Now, we know, to be fair to the member for Hume, he wasn't the only energy minister in that government. There was another one who was secretly commissioned, and he said about nuclear, it's very costly to set it up in the first instance, so I don't think we can be naive about how difficult it is to get it off the ground. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Australian people are entitled to ask, if it's such a good idea, why didn't they do it in their 9 years in office? They had 22 energy policies. The only thing they didn't try is nuclear. The only thing they didn't try is nuclear energy.
Order. I'd like to hear from the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Prime Minister. Next week, on State of Origin game night, statistics show that women and children in New South Wales are almost 40% more likely to experience domestic violence. Alcohol and gambling are known drivers of domestic violence, and government violence prevention frameworks in Australia have been reluctant to tackle the multi-billion-dollar alcohol and gambling industries. When will your government take greater steps to regulate these harmful industries to keep Australian women safe in this national crisis and encourage greater prevention strategies from sporting codes like the NRL?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question and for the very constructive discussion I had with her and other crossbench members about this critical issue earlier today. Violence against women is indeed a national crisis, and I accept completely the startling statistics that the member raised with me earlier today about a spike that will occur when a major sporting event like the State of Origin game being held next Wednesday night is held, and that there is a link, of course we know, between alcohol, excessive alcohol consumption and domestic violence, most tragically. The solutions to that, of course, are not simple. We don't have barriers in this country to people having a beer or a glass of wine. And therefore, we need to, I think, make sure that we put in place measures that do make a difference, so recognising those facts that I accept that the member has put forward. Preventing violence against women is a priority of this government as part of our commitment to gender equity that we regard as one of the things we want to be characterised by. We need to focus on prevention, but we also need to focus on perpetrators, and I think the member's question goes to that, the responsibility of sporting codes as well. And can I say this from my experience, a range of the football codes do do significant work out there in peer groups, if you like, promoting safety and promoting good behaviour, essentially. There's nothing wrong with having a beer. There is something wrong with excessive consumption leading to the violence that does tragically occur too much. Now, we have recorded $3.4 billion since we came to office to support the national plan that began in 2022. We invested in the budget an additional $1 billion for housing and shelters for women and children escaping domestic violence. We have made major changes to the Sex Discrimination Act to prevent sexual harassment. We've taken long overdue action against sexual assault on campuses. We've started an ALRC review to strengthen justice responses to sexual violence. We had in the budget as well $925 million for a new leaving violence payment, which will, I believe, make a significant difference as well. There is more to do. This is something that the whole of society has to confront, and men in particular have to take responsibility for changing attitudes, changing culture, because it demeans everyone. It demeans women. It can lead, of course, tragically to death. It has an impact on children, and we often see people who've experienced and witnessed violence against their mums, tragically it being repeated through generations. But it also harms men. It harms all of us when we don't have good relations that are respectful. That's something that brings joy to people regardless of their gender, and it's something that should be taken for granted as something that's a benefit of a society like Australia. Unfortunately, it's not. But I thank the member for her question. I thank her and others as well. Can I refer to the member for Curtin who rang me over the weekend, and we had a discussion about a dreadful violent incident in her electorate on the weekend. Tragically, you know, every weekend, every week, every month, every year, there's just too much of this. And it is something that we in this House have a responsibility to address. State governments, who are the front line of community service delivery, have a responsibility to address, but our whole society needs to be engaged with as well.
I give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to protect participants by cracking down on fraud and rorts in the NDIS?
The call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for her question and the work she does on the Joint Select Committee for the NDIS. The government, and I think most people in the parliament, are very committed to the NDIS, its future, and that it delivers outcomes for participants. Since we promised to focus on stamping fraud out of the NDIS, we've made some significant advances in identifying, stopping and deterring fraud that has been happening for years in the scheme. In October 2022, we committed $126 million to establish the long overdue Fraud Fusion Task Force. It's a multi-agency task force to better protect taxpayers and participants. Before we set up the Fraud Fusion Task Force, there were 41 fraud investigations on hand and 13 before the courts. I'm pleased to advise the House that in the March quarter of this year there are now 548 fraud investigations underway and 59 individuals before the courts. Before we established the Fraud Fusion Task Force, about $214 million in payments of about 5,000 participants was being evaluated. Now several billion dollars of payments are being evaluated for tens of thousands of participants. But for almost every single type of fraud that we're investigating now, we've discovered that this has been going on for years. For every provider fraud, we find historic claiming data for that provider or a similar group of providers going back for years. normally avuncular member for Deakin made a chippy contribution in the debate where he said that most rorts started under Labor. Most rorts started... no, you were nice to me personally, thank you. But the problem is the rorts have been rife for years. The NDIA did not have a system to see, deter or detect. We are making up for years of bad systems. I think the members of the parliament will be shocked with some of the examples. There was a long-standing vulnerability of identity management for participants and providers.
Order. Members
Get
on
this.
my left.
Under the previous government, they were literally paying non-existent ghosts payments in the scheme. But the prepayment claim scrutiny was non-existent. It used to be, under the previous government, that they would look at 21 claims a day, 21 out of tens of thousands. We now look at thousands. But get this, so bad was the system that if you made a claim between 5 p.m. and 6:30 p.m, I kid you not, there was no scrutiny. You just got paid within the 24 hours.
The minister will pause. The member for Deakin knows what's going to happen soon. He's on a warning. I would just like there to be one day where I don't have to remove him. Not you, the member for New England. You're fine. Just if the member for Deakin wants to stay, he won't say anything else for the remainder of this answer, and hopefully the remainder of all answers.
I know that everyone in this House wants to stamp out the rorts, but I have to say it takes a Labor government to fix the NDIS.
Give a call to the honourable member for Wannon.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In a Home Affairs brief to the Immigration Minister dated 8th of August 2022, it states, and I quote, "At the recent Australia-New Zealand leaders' meeting, the Prime Minister committed to a common-sense approach to the removal of New Zealand citizens long-term resident in Australia." Is this brief accurate?
The order, the Leader of the House, the Minister for Home Affairs, the members on my left and right will cease objecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
So let me get this right about the question. It's a question about a brief from one minister, not from my department, from another department, to a minister of which I wasn't a party to either. So it's not from me or to me. And I obviously haven't seen the brief.
Well, the Prime Minister's talking about the brief that you
asked me about.
So you asked him about order. Look, the member for Wannon, yeah, but you mightn't like the answer he's giving. I understand that, but if he's referring directly to the brief that he was asked about in the question, in any definition that is being directly relevant, I don't know what he's about to say about the brief, but I'm going to give you the call, but
yeah. The question was, is the brief accurate? That was the question.
Well, resume your seat. That's the question, and as I was explaining to the member for Wannon, the Prime Minister was talking about the brief just as you interrupted him. So if he goes on to another subject now and topic now, he's got to be directly relevant, but we won't be able to circle back and say, well, he's not answering the question because we've already taken the point of order, and it's only you can take one point of order. So it's probably the wrong time to take the point of order, but he's entitled to do that at any time. So the Prime Minister's got to remain directly relevant. He's talking about the brief. I'm going to listen carefully to make sure he's been directly relevant to the part of the question he was asked.
Mr. Speaker, so I'm asked about a brief that I haven't seen, that wasn't from me, that wasn't to me, that so I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. What?
Order. The member for Moreton will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. There's just far too much noise. Order. The member for Bruce is also warned. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. What I do know, Mr. Speaker, what I do know is that the AAT did decide a 45-year-old New Zealand man convicted of 3 charges of an indecent act with a child under 16 should be allowed to stay in Australia. The decision was made in accordance with Ministerial Direction 79, which was issued by the Leader of the Opposition's junior minister, the Member for
Home
Banks,
Affairs,
and which directed decision-makers to apply the principle that Australia may afford a higher level of tolerance of criminal conduct in relation to non-citizens who had lived in Australia for most of their life.
Order. Give a call to the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief for early childhood education and care workers who play a critical role in supporting our youngest Australians?
Call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education, the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Aston for her question. I thoroughly enjoyed visiting Aston with the member for Aston some months ago, where we got to visit an early childhood education centre and importantly also spoke to some of the young people taking advantage of our fee-free TAFE and doing an early childhood education and care certificate. Mr Speaker, this government's #1 priority is cost of living relief for every Australian, through tax cuts, at the doctors, through energy relief and, of course, through cheaper childcare. We're listening to early childhood educators and workers and taking tangible actions to ease their cost of living pressures. Now, for too long, Mr Speaker, this sector was forgotten and neglected by those opposite. And I'm proud to say that this government has made an historic commitment to contribute funding towards a wage increase for early childhood workers. Historic, Mr Speaker. And it's a critical first step in delivering our ambition and our vision for a universal early childhood education and care system. We know that we can't do that without a strong and sustainable early learning workforce. Now, this morning I visited Good Start Garran with the lovely member for Canberra, and I heard from early childhood educators and workers just how important this commitment is to them and what it means to them as educators and teachers. As Ros Baxter, the CEO of Good Start Early Learning, said this morning, it's wonderful to have a government that is investing in this critical sector and our youngest children. Yep, right. Mr Speaker, early childhood educators and teachers have worked so hard and for so long in this critical sector. For them to know that they're finally getting the recognition that they deserve for the work that they do is indeed a watershed moment. Now, on top of this, our tax cuts will bring further cost of living relief to early childhood educators. For an early childhood educator on $46,000 a year, that's an extra $829 in their pockets. For an average early childhood teacher, they're getting a tax cut of $1,404. Real money back in the pockets of people who do some of the most important work in our society, because they deserve more than just our gratitude. Now, those opposite had absolutely no plan for this sector. They had 10 years to do something and they did nothing. In contrast, we're charting the course for an affordable, accessible and inclusive world-class early childhood education and care sector. While those opposite are here to yell across the aisle, to say no to everything, we're getting things done.
Has concluded. Call the Prime Minister. Order. Order. The member for Wannon will just sit down. Order. The Prime Minister has the floor.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.